Hello and welcome to the Sales Leaders series. I'm your host, Freddie, where I'll be gathering B2B SaaS sales leaders from across the world to answer 5 short, topical B2B SaaS sales questions. These questions are going to be the same each week, bar one, giving you insight and different perspectives into how top performers within the industry think, as well as actionable advice you guys can use in your own selling careers. Our guest this week is Gavin Hewitt. Gavin is the Vice President of Sales at Attentive, a mobile messaging platform for innovative ecom and retail brands. With over 20 years of cumulative experience as a founder, CEO, sales leader, and investor, Gavin is no stranger to revenue generation and go-to-market strategy in the software industry. After starting, scaling, and exiting his first business, Compass Power Services, Gavin swiftly moved into heading up sales teams as VP in companies such as Bluecore, Yonder, and now Attentive. Outside his main day-to-day, Gavin works on helping other startups scale as part of the Techstars Seattle program, a globally recognized technology accelerator. Gavin, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, Freddie, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, no, so I've been really excited to have this conversation, especially as you've got so much experience in one, starting businesses and growing sales teams at different stages. So I'm really excited to get into this.
Yeah, no, I'm excited as well. And for as part of the introduction as well, I had the honor of working with the DealPad team as they were in Techstars Seattle. So really excited to be able to give back a little bit here to them. Really impressed with what you guys are building.
Fantastic. Appreciate that, Gavin. And that's a good segue into the first question. You've grown revenue from 0 to 40 million at Bluecore specifically, and then looking at Attentive, 35 million to all the way over 300 million a year in ARR. What phase would you say was the hardest to move through, and why?
Yeah, it's a great. They're all hard, but some. It's funny. They're hard, but some of them provide more energy than others, I think. Like early stage, when you're trying to get those very first customers and you're just cranking, right? You're pushing 60, 80-hour weeks and you're kind of living and dying by any deals that you're able to get. In retrospect, that's like very stressful, but in the moment, you're having the best time of your life, right? Like you're with like-minded people and you're really, really pushing. And I think that special companies, even like Attentive, are able to do that or create that feeling at scale, right? That nobody's going to let anybody else down around them, and we're all kind of moving towards the same thing. I think that the repeat thing that I keep having is that you get product market fit, you get this really quick growth curve. Let's say you get your first million, your first 2 million, and you bump up to 10 million really fast, maybe even 20 million. And you get all the early adopters, all the folks who are kind of willing to take on new technology. And then once you've gotten through that tranche of folks, that's when things start getting really hard, right? Like you have to start, competing in a different way, likely. You have to start building kind of conversations on value more than historically you've had to, as you kind of move from evangelical to a value-based selling approach. I love a value-based selling approach, but that transition itself is hard. It's different people are talented at those things. Sellers, different leaders are talented at those things. And so, yeah, I think on a growth curve, that kind of moment, and some might call that like the first mini chasm that you're having to cross. But it's really interesting. I mean, I find it fascinating now. I really like that because I've learned so much over time during those phases, but those continue to be the hardest.
During that transitionary period, especially when you've passed that high growth period, is that something, obviously first time, I can imagine that was something that you would have been experiencing, for the first time, but having done that, multiple times now, is that something you would encourage other sales leaders going through a similar experience to kind of look towards and kind of prepare for, or is it kind of reach that stage and figure it out from there?
Yeah, great question. I mean, as much as you can get ahead of it. So my first experience with this, there were a lot of different varying reasons. It really wasn't the product or sales necessarily on its own, but we sort of had we had this great curve, and then sort of not a flattening, but it got a little less steep. And it took us a while to adjust. And I think that that doesn't have to happen at all. So Attentive has just been like a rocket ship that's continued to go up even as we've gone through those changes. But I think what we did early on is we started implementing things like a value-based selling approach, right? Really starting to understand like what are the things that we're pitching to customers that are going to attach to the things that they care about and ultimately get them to convert more quickly. We did a great job of implementing MedPick, so really understanding where gaps were on deals, which is great for two things. One is you're maturing as a business, and for a lot of like early stage folks, the forecasting becomes kind of difficult, right? I think having some type of framework in place like a MedPick to help you forecast better, but to also identify like, hey, there's a gap here in this deal, and there's an opportunity for us to go fill that gap and ensure that we close that deal. We've kept our sales cycles at Attentive short. We've kept our conversion rates exceptionally high, even as we've gotten past that kind of first tranche of folks. But I think a lot of that is because of the momentum of the space that we started and the sales execution and the way we've evolved and enabled sellers over time. So I do think that enablement has been critical in that piece as well, making sure we're just kind of staying slightly ahead of the curve so that we can keep growing the way that we want to. Because yeah, to your point, like the first time I did it, it sort of felt like running into a wall. It was painful and stressful, but I think those are also the learnings that have catapulted my career. So
yeah, fantastic. I think that leads us on really nicely to the second question that I've got you here, Gavin. Based on your time, not only Attentive, but Bluecore, Yonder, as well as CPS, from starting to where you grew the business, whether that's obviously now Attentive or when you left those other businesses, I can imagine that your sales motion, as you just mentioned, evolved significantly over those different periods. Thinking about not necessarily the processes now, but people, how did you decide when was the right time to hire and create new roles?
Yeah, I mean, it's a function of a lot of things. And now we're sort of getting where I'm at now at a scale where you have to sort of think about, how the org structure and what's nice to have versus must have and those types of things as well. I think early on, I would challenge a lot of founders who are getting, their first big, fundraise or things like that. If you have a product that you think you can create product market fit with, if you have an MVP, you've got a few customers using it, people are excited about it, throw fuel on it, right? And the way I think, generally speaking, is that's not necessarily through like a bunch of marketing spend or, really focusing on partnerships. Those are things that you should invest in over time and are going to grow over several years, right? Control your own destiny and hire top of funnel sales development reps. And typically early stage, I'll actually go a 2-to-1 ratio, 2 SDRs to 1 AE. And if it gets to a point where that individual is bandwidth constrained, you hire an AE, right? And I actually go 2-to-1 ratio until it's 6-to-3. And then I start hiring to parity, 6 and 6. And from there, actually start kind of doing a 1-to-1 ratio moving forward. And it's worked exceptionally well in most places that I've been to where that was the approach that we took. I think another really huge hire early that people don't prioritize is an ops person, somebody who can really help the systems, both from a CRM perspective, but also some of the kind of automation around cold outreach and things like that, really help accelerate sales in the early days. And then as you start to scale, if you become a multi-product SKU company, if you're, changing different ways in which the motion's moving, I think enablement is critical. It's become more and more critical over time for me. But in those early days of like brute force and controlling your own destiny, it's getting those SDRs cranking. And SDR, I think, it's one of the hardest jobs in the world, right? It really is. But that becomes the lifeblood of your culture too. I would recommend to folks, like, don't outsource that. Like, those are the people who are going to bleed whatever color your company is. And if you do it right, you're actually creating the next wave of sellers within your organization. I would say that 95% of the reps that are on our strategic and enterprise teams at Attentive came from SDR, and sort of the development out of that program over time. So it's a really great way to build the team, and I would hire those people early and often because they're also not really expensive. Their OKRs are really clear. If they're not hitting them, it's time to move on and kind of like keep that moving forward. So I know it was a little harsh on the end there, but I think there's it's a really neat way to build and scale your organization and get those leads.
Yeah, it makes sense. I think that's also incredibly appropriate for 2023 as well. Coming off the back of especially large companies, laying off a lot of tech, individuals, especially within, software. You mentioned there, especially in those early stages, kind of maxing out the throughput before you think about adding more salespeople, and that they become the lifeblood of that company, right? That they become the almost backbone of understanding your customers the best, understanding where this product fits the best. I think one thing that I've seen a lot of sales leaders or people going through that phase struggle with is assimilating that knowledge, especially as those sales reps are at the front line of all of your customer interactions. How would you, advise someone going through that in making sure that knowledge isn't lost, especially when it's so important to the business scaling over time?
Yeah, this one I've had a lot of learnings on this as well. I think that there are companies that as they grow, they're really able to hang on to like the heart of the organization. And when I say heart, I don't just mean like the energy of it, but there's also sort of the knowledge that comes with that, and how the business operates and the best way to get things moving, and how to get people across the line and how to really evangelize what it is that we're selling. There are companies that get to a certain scale where the board maybe or leadership kind of says, oh, we have to bring in like people from the outside to like, because we've done this before. And what I've seen, at least at Attentive, has been one of the more impressive things. They have allowed a lot of the early team to really grow into their role. And there's this notion of the Peter principle, right? Like, can people kind of make it to that next step? And by and large, these leaders have done such an amazing job, but they've also held on to that original DNA. And so not only one of the most impressive ones I've seen is our CRO, watching him grow from, a VP of sales all the way into a true CRO managing sales and CS and a 700 person org, has been like amazing, right? It's fun for me to witness that. And it's because the company hasn't let go of their heart. And so I would say in the early days, like if you have good people, make sure that you're giving them opportunities to succeed, but both as somebody as part of the business, but also like their professional development, and give them those shots. Like those are the people that are going to go to the end of the earth for you, and for your business. And that's a hard thing to hire externally as you're scaling. Does that answer your question? I'm not sure if that was
that was perfect. That was perfect.
All right.
Thinking about your sales career in its entirety, and you can be as specific as you like here, Gavin. What's been the toughest moment in your career, whether that's at CPS or in those VP sales roles? How have you dealt with it, and what advice would you give to others, not necessarily to avoid those mistakes, but better deal with those experiences and tough times?
Yeah, I mean, it sort of dovetails off of my last statement there. So, the toughest time for me, and there have been tough times, believe me. There's been times where I've been at early stage companies where we didn't land the funding that we wanted, right? One of those happened right at the beginning of COVID, and a lot of term sheets were getting pulled, and we had to basically shut down the company. Those types of things are hard, right? I've had to riff, portions of teams in the past. That's hard. The one that really hurt though for me, Bluecore was a amazing experience for me for several years. We started that company. I was part of I was a founding team member. So there were 4 of us who started Bluecore. We took it from nothing to something, to about 220 folks, and raised a lot of capital and had a lot of fun on the way. And at some point, we were all first timers in terms of leading and scaling a business like that. And the board suggested that we needed to bring in some gray hair. I joke that if they just waited a few years, gray hair. But we ended up interviewing a bunch of people, and we brought someone in from Oracle, actually a couple folks from Oracle, and I had a lot of people sort of look at us sideways like, whoa, like Oracle, like that's going to really change things. But they had told a really great story, and we thought that it was perfect for what it was that we needed. I think that the approach that ultimately was then taken after we made that transition really hurt the business. And it sort of comes back to like, if you rip the heart out of the company, it's harder to get people to push in the same way that they were. And you start getting to a situation where you've got people that, are just coming to work because it's a job. And you've got people who are really passionate about your company who may choose to leave. And it just becomes really difficult. And so that specific case, it just broke my heart. It was, that was our baby. We built it from nothing to something. And I think having now seen what it's like when you kind of hang on to that heart and the success that you can have with that business, which is the experience that I've had here at Attentive, I really wish I could go back and pound the table a little bit and say, no, like we got this. So for everybody out there, just keep pushing.
Great answer. Nicely leads on to the 4th question as well, actually. So how do you go about personal development, and especially goal setting in personal development? And then, on from that, and I know this is quite, slightly unrelated, what are you most excited about in SaaS sales looking forward to, the next 5 years and the next 10 years?
Yeah, I mean, I think personal development's huge. I think that there are times when you get to certain spots and you're like, you rest on your laurels and like, you just can't do that. You've got to keep pushing and advancing. I think for me, the big one in the last couple of years is that, a lot of how I managed sales was very EQ driven. It was more art than science. I think really becoming a data driven leader is something that I want to achieve, and I'm on my path to being able to make better data driven decisions. It is critical for folks like me to have people around them that are able to like pull the data and sort of provide a lens via data into what it is that I'm either trying to achieve or trying to prove. And so I think that's been my biggest development over the course of the last, 3 to 5 years, let's say. I think going forward, and this is true for everyone, but like staying on top of technology and being at the forefront of that, I think even almost more so for some of the mentorship that I'm doing with early stage companies is like, what are people doing now that's like moving the needle? Just because it worked in the past doesn't mean that it still works. And so, the stuff that I think about being really excited about for sales specifically is like all the stuff around AI. Like how much of this stuff can we truly start to automate? What kind of data science can we use to get, more meetings and higher conversions and all of those things? I am quite fascinated to see where that goes. I think that'll be a fundamental shift here in the next 5 to 10 years for sales, even contracting, right? I mean, that stuff is stuff that honestly machines should be able to do at some point in the next 5 to 10 years in my mind. So how do you make sure that you're creating a sales organization that leverages those things to be the most competitive, but also again hangs on to sort of the EQ human side of it to make sure that you're winning in every instance?
Yeah, it makes sense. And I think this ties to AI as well. Based on what you just mentioned there, especially with the personal development side and we had this question earlier on in the series where one of our sales leaders asked, is sales art or science, right? Is that being data driven? Is that more important at a specific stage within a business, or do you think it's as important from where you are at Attentive to day one starting a startup within the software space? And how do you think AI will change that going forward?
Yeah, sorry. So I'm hearing the question right. Just in a like, how is the notion of art and science changing over time, and how will AI impact?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that, and also at what stage? I think that there's these things that happen early stage, like the art matters, right? It's a high wire act. You're just trying to figure things out. You're trying to get feedback from customers, from prospects in real time, and making sure that that's feeding back into the system. And like, there's a give and take that's happening that's very different. You're evangelizing, you're sort of showing up and throwing up and then trying to like figure things out. That a lot of that is art. And that's why like early stage sellers a lot of times don't work well in big companies, right? When it becomes just Salesforce reports and process repeatability, methodology, like there are people that just will die in that environment. So I think that the art really matters in those early days. I think that as you start to scale, the data helps you to make informed decisions so you have less of a chance of failure at any given thing that you're trying to do. And it's usually informing some kind of art, right? Or thought that you have, or feeling that you have about the business. But it just allows you to make, I think percentage-wise, you're just going to make better decisions if you're able to leverage data to prove it out. And then at scale, I mean, I think that's the big conundrum that people have is like, do they go too far to the AI data side, and are kind of are blindsided by certain things. I think one thing I've learned here at Attentive a lot is that even at scale, if you see something that seems like a little off, like the ability to very quickly go deep, like pull the thread and figure out what's going on down here, you sort of realize that, wow, this could impact a lot more things in the future, or it could have like a positive effect in this way if we're able to solve this really, really quickly. And so I think the art continues to be important, but much even more dependent on data and AI to identify an anomaly that you then can go and like focus on. But my one fear, also with sales teams, just in general, and this is for the sales leaders out there, like everyone's always heard the sort of analogy that it's not, you're not coaching a soccer team, right? You're coaching a bunch of individual tennis players. And it requires, it's a team, but they all kind of operate very differently in terms of their emotions and who they are as humans. And I think that keeping the kind of EQ side of it and managing that, and keeping people motivated is more important than ever, especially as we're like remote working. I just think that those are things that I do fear get lost as we move to a more automated universe, but like it's going to be important for retention of good talent.
Yeah. Great answer.
That was a lot. Was that
that was perfect. You hit the nail on the head there, Gavin. That's exactly what I would get out there. Fifth and final question. Now, this question was given to us by head of sales at Occupier, Jacob Walker. And he asked you, Gavin, how often do you whiteboard with marketing, customer success, and any other related teams?
Yeah, that's a funny question because since COVID, I can't think of the last time I whiteboarded. My skills would be like really bad. But I'll take it as like collaboration, right? Like often are getting together and figuring things out. Early stage, I always whiteboarded a ton, right? It was just like, let's get in the room, let's solve it. We're going to figure this out right now. Like there was no time like the present always. Now at the kind of scale that we are at Attentive, and the growth curve, right? You got to remember, like we've grown. When I joined later here than I've joined most companies. So I joined in 2020 with about 200 people. We scaled up to 2,000 people in that time. And so, when you're hiring 25, 30 people a week, and and you're moving fast and you're signing thousands and thousands of customers, you end up getting siloed, but not because people don't want to communicate. It's because if you take your eye off the ball, like bad things will happen. And so like sales was focused on sales. CS was servicing this like deluge of customers that were being thrown at them. Marketing was out like setting up all these events and trying to figure out, what they were doing in terms of building the brand as we were growing so fast. And so I think we're actually at a point now where we're kind of saying, hey, everybody feels pretty good in their lane. We've all done really well. I'm quite surprised at how well we've done kind of being somewhat siloed. And now like there's a lot of the cross coordination between the teams. And so I would say that, I have standing meetings with, marketing and CS every single week. And myself and then my teams do as well. And we're constantly trying to move things forward, but we're usually doing it on some type of planning cadence. So it's like, hey, let's really kind of lay down the things we want to achieve this quarter. And then every other meeting is about progress towards that or input on that progress. But marketing, CS, enablement's a huge one at scale. Like I keep mentioning enablement. It just is so critical once you have a big team. And then ops. Like those are the 4 groups that I think I probably meet with the most.
Fantastic. Gavin, that's all the questions that I had for you today. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Awesome. It's my first podcast. So thank you so much. I've loved it. I only do this for Dealpad.
Hey, look, we appreciate it, Gavin. We appreciate it. That was a really good one. And I can't believe that was your first podcast. You're a natural.
Yeah. We're done recording. Are we done?
No, we're still going. But
oh shoot, you can edit that out, right?
I can edit that one out. But anyone listening that wants more information about Attentive, Gavin, or any other things, especially Techstars that Gavin does on the side, there'll be a few show notes and links in the description under this video and podcast. Gavin, is there anything else that you want to leave the audience with? Any final parting words, last comments?
Yeah, you guys should check out Dealpad. Pretty fucking awesome.
Full stop. I love that. Gavin, thank you so much. And to all those listening, really appreciate it. We'll see you next week.
Thanks, Freddie.